topic I did my research on was discrimination against people with disabilities. So, discrimination against the disabled has been essential to almost every society since time immemorial. The quality of life experienced by the highest number of disabled persons in the contemporary world is significantly low than that enjoyed by the non-disabled. Research shows about 9 million people living with disability in the US, and there very skewed evidence to show the figures are likely to reduce in the foreseeable future. As per the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, of 1990, no citizen is supposed to be deprived of employment, access to structures, events of any kind due to disability. So, like the observation from my locations I visited. So, one I did was in Belltown on June 23rd from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., where I mingled with persons with disabilities. The first mission was to carry my observation on the issue of discrimination meted out of the physically disabled people. I studied the construction procedure during the morning hours and ran slightly into the afternoon. A candidate conversation that I made at Belltown was sufficient to allow me to address some of my research questions. For instance, I was able to answer to the extent to which the social and economic outcomes of disabled people differ from those of non-disabled people. How do outcomes vary between different groups within the disabled population? The visitation enabled me to make inference inferences to that. The experience of each physical disability and the need for support is varied across people with diverse types of disabilities. Different people had different types of disabilities, including not limited to sensory, intellectual, physical, as well as psychological. Most of the individuals I studied cited illnesses as cause of the disability. For others, it was an issue for obtained at birth. Duration of condition influenced the type of support and care needed and the type of access required. Then I visited on June 26th to the University District. I made my conversation from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. I was able to find out that the time was highly congested, lacking parking spots, such as more people like to commute on foot. This becomes an issue for those in wheelchairs due to the fact that there are no access ramps to most offices from Main Road. I had a good time to observe and gather some information in relation to the plight of physically disabled persons that I met in this location, and observation on the discrimination meted on at physically disabled. As a result, I made these conclusions out there. Most of the people I observed for eyesight ranged from 65 to 90 years. Most of the individuals with disability were unemployed. The extent of social and economic outcomes of the people with disability greatly differed from those who were non disabled, a condition that facilitates stigma among the disabled individuals. The economic status, or rather living standards, income, was not enough to support the independence of the physically disabled. The degree of support for the disabled is low in Seattle because most of the buildings do not have access ramps, and where the same has been included in the building. No reasonable accommodation or special treatment has been offered. Then on June 27th, I went to Capitol Hill, and at 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Here there were expensive housing, and there were a lot of young professional executives that want to find easy access to office buildings, either to work or search employment. However, just like Belltown, most offices do not have access ramps to the offices, and nothing much has been done to assist the physically disabled. Most of them have staircases without keeping in mind that some people are either blind or use wheelchairs to access buildings. The sort of observation that I made was sufficient to allow me to answer the extent that the needs of disabled people currently being met, what level and type of support they need to perform everyday activities. I found out that experiencing disability can be affected by environmental factors that have a negative impact on the body functioning as the ability to do some activities. Most of the discriminating disadvantages are raised the social milieu that does not care for the needs of the physically disabled persons. On June 28th, I visited Columbia City. Columbia City formed the commercial hub for the South Seattle area, and there are many dining establishments and horde of eateries. Sadly, in the most of the dining establishments, I observed that none of them were employed by any individual with disability, and if any, no, there were no access ramps again to offer reasonable accommodation was provided. I was able to make an observation and conclude that the discrimination meted on the persons with disability precludes them from undertaking any activities, also prevents them from conducting sex roles and social as well as cultural identity. And another place I visited was schools in Montlake on June 29th. I was able to find that nothing much has been done to offer reasonable accommodation to workers having physical disabilities. This has made it impossible for students as well as teaching staff to participate at significant life issues. The observations were seminal in helping me answer my query on the factors and facilitate or hinder the participation of disabled people in important life areas. I concluded that in environmental factors like, again, inaccessible ramps to buildings and other assistive equipment, not forgetting discriminatory practice, are the main cause of reduced participation in school and social activities. Lack of access to building, negative attitude impede participation of people with disability in the locality. And then also on Friday, I visited Ballard. This location was also amassed with many instances of discrimination that caused stigmatization. Most of the population here feels detached from the mainstream because of the lack of proper access and reasonable accommodation to the disabled. It helped me to deal with the issue on stigmatization of the people with disabled. I made observation that most individuals with disabilities are stigmatized by their situation because they feel discriminated. A good number of people with disability lack a good employment to suffice their needs. Social deviance and disability links to this because as a social deviance, a link exists between disability and deviance which can only be understood with a reference to freedom from social duties and obligations expressed in the sick role constructed as well as subsequent derivatives. Research on social response to disadvantaged minority groups like the persons with impairments has been crucial for sociologists working within the tradition of symbolic interactionism. Observational study findings. From this study, it was evident that the issue of disability can be viewed from social construction point of view. From the observation made, non-disabled individuals have more access to employment opportunity as opposed to members in the disability group. The employment rate of the disabled has been reduced considerably as compared to non-disabled, thus because of the high rates of discrimination among the people with disability. Many schools like Montlake don't have ramps which are usable. Environmental factors like inaccessible ramps, building, and other assistive equipment are not forgetting discriminatory practices are the main causes of reduced participation in school and activities. From the study, it was observed and people living with disability get stigmatized in the society they live in since they are perceived as a different and in other times seen as social misfits. It was observed that economic status, or rather living standards, income, were not enough to support the independence of the physically disabled. The study found out the degree of support for the disabled is low in Seattle because most of the buildings do not have access ramps, and where the same has been included in building, no reasonable of any accommodation or special treatment has been offered. Some conclusion and recommendation. The conclusion I made from the study is that issue of disability is a stereotype as evil in society. Some religions view people with disability as possessed by evil spirits. Thus, the disabled are seen as social deviants who should not associate with non-disabled. The interactive cultural values on disability as displayed by the culture to which they associate themselves dominate their understanding of disability. But based on all the collected, observed, and analyzed data, I would recommend there is need to be there is need for society where the people with disability live to make sure that the essential social amenities of life, like toilets, bathrooms, residential accommodation, school, market centers, community centers, not forgetting infrastructures, have access to enable people with disabilities to easy access. The state needs to promulgate new legislation that support people with disabilities. For instance, the new awakening promulgation of ADA needed to project the centrality of the person with disability. The negative perspectives and the discrimination need to turn into constructive attitudes. Counseling is one of the devices of dealing with social stigma caused to disabled individuals. And last, well, government needs to offer political goodwill to the main sport groups to deal with disabled persons, particularly the non-government institutions that offer support to various of disability groups. Thank you, and that was my presentation.